Today we're going to be talking about linear rails on the Ender 3 Pro. Now, linear rails, the big question, do they improve performance? Well, the answer is yes and no at the same time, and here's why. Linear rails are not about making your prints look better, but it's definitely about keeping the consistency of your prints the same throughout the life of the printer's use. In other words, once you have your rails set up perfectly, there's nothing left to adjust. At that point, you're really just doing some basic maintenance. For instance, the MGN12 carriages on these MGNH rails are metal on metal. There's ball bearings inside of these carriages. So metal on metal contact requires that you have some sort of lubrication to ensure that you do not accidentally prematurely wear things out. So that's where things like Super Lube comes in. You take a very tiny amount and you just kind of smear it where the grooves are, and that's where the ball bearings inside the carriages are going to move. And that's pretty much it. You just clean it off and put a new application of lube once in a while, and you're pretty good. Now here's the thing. Linear rails, putting them on, getting them perfect, is a nightmare. It's not for the faint of heart. It's not a beginner mod. It's not even an intermediate mod. For the setup that I've got specifically, you must be intimately familiar with everything involving your printer's frame. Because if you're not, you are never going to get it on. So let's talk about the components. The Z-axis and the X-axis I got from AliExpress from a company called Funcier. I'm probably pronouncing that wrong, but there will be a link in the description about it. So the Z-axis is the one that's a nightmare. And the reason why it's a nightmare is if you try and do it alone, I guarantee somewhere in the process you're going to have the carriage slide off of the rail and you will lose ball bearings and have to replace ball bearings. That happened to me when applying this mod for the first time. That being said, there is a very cheap way to avoid that. This is a little plug that's designed to go inside of the little holes where you would put screws in for the rail. Definitely get some of these. This will make your life easier because this little stopper prevents the rail from sliding off when installing your frame. Free tip. Big tip. Now, the next question is, do I have to bother with genuine Highwind rails, or can I get the cheap ones on Amazon or eBay, etc.? And the answer is absolutely. You do not need Highwind rails. In fact, I think Highwind rails are probably completely overkill for a 3D printer. How do I know that? I've got an identical printer to my right, and this is all just Chinese knockoff rails that we got on Amazon for half the price of the genuine Highwind stuff. It works perfectly fine. They're honestly just as good in terms of constrained motion. There's no need to go with Highwind. I went with Highwind on this build because I wanted to make that comparison. And in a future video, I will make a genuine comparison between genuine Highwind and what's often referred to as Chaiwind, because it's a Chinese Highwind knockoff, right? So, getting on from there, let's talk about why everything is a nightmare to set up at first. Now, it has to do with binding. These carriages are on the rails in such a way that the motion is almost absolutely truly linear. There is no wiggle room. So if this rail is tilted like a quarter of a degree from this point to the top, that will make the top go over to the right or the left off by just a few fractions of a millimeter. Now, because that is dependent on this one also being level, as you go up, you'll have this side start to bind, and then you'll get stuck. So if these are not perfectly level with your frame, you're going to have a problem. Now, the same thing goes for the Y-axis system. Now, this is not from Funcier. This is actually from Printer Mods. And I went with the one from Printer Mods specifically because it utilizes the stock Y-axis carriage, but it's also a dual rail system. Now, there are ones out there that are a single rail system, and then it's got a modified Y-axis plate right here that connects flat. But I didn't want that because that could introduce the possibility of wobble if you're starting to go really fast. And it just seemed like a better setup to go with dual y-axis. But again, if the y-axis carriages are not perfectly level with each other, they will bind. So in my case, I had some really annoying problems with the y-axis. Well, first off, it's the same concept. If this bolt right here has the rail lower than all the way in the back, well, now you've got a wiggle, right? You've got one rail going up or down slightly, and if the other one doesn't mirror that perfectly, then as you move back to the part where it's not completely mirrored, you're going to bind up and then you're going to get stuck. Another thing I had to deal with is these were not perfectly aligned with the stock y-axis plate. I actually had to shim the distance between the MGN12 carriage and that metal plate right there that is adapted onto the y-axis gantry. That was a little bit of a difficult process, and it took a few days to figure out what was going on. Basically, those bolts are not... I'm trying to get my camera to focus here. They're not perfectly straight up and down. So if they were to bolt down and they were perfectly straight up and down, that'd be perfect. But because they weren't, they were actually tilted in like this, because instead of going straight down, it had to go in a curve because this rail is poking out a little bit too much. So I just used some washers and shimmed it out, and now it runs fine. It doesn't bind anymore. But there's a certain process to getting everything completely mirrored, and it's a long process. And the same thing goes for the z-axis. Now the x-axis is very easy because this rail just bolts in to the extrusion here with just 4 bolts, and then you're good. Then you got your carriage that bolts on, or you got your plate that bolts onto the carriage here. Now, this is not the stock plate. This is no longer the exact same thing as what you would have on your stock Ender 3. You're going to have to find a design for something that holds your fan and your ABL mount with this system. Now, I personally designed this system. I call it my companion mount system. You can find it on my Thingiverse page. And if you have this particular X-axis system and you just want to run the stock fan and an easy ABL, just print it in ABS and you're good to go. Perfectly easy to do. It's free. It's for you if you need it. So then let's talk about quality and consistency then. You know, what's the point of going through all this if it's so difficult? Well, the reason you would do this is for the consistency. You're not really going to see better prints because of this, but what you're going to find is that every single print will come out just as good as the last based on your slicing settings. So what you're doing is you're removing a variable. That's what this is all about, removing variables during the diagnostic process. So when you know that there's a certain component that is the exact same every single time, that's one less thing you have to consider when you're diagnosing a problem with a print. Now, linear rails are very, very consistent. And once everything is lined up and tightened down, you probably don't have to ever adjust them again. Not for a very long time. And this is not a CNC system, right? Nothing's really under a lot of load. So the chances of anything really coming undone is pretty slim. Especially if you use little crush washers on all your connections. That's really going to hold everything in place by using a little bit of pressure on those threads to keep everything nice and tight. So when you're running a production machine, the consistency is very important, because when you're trying to figure out, you know, what happened here or why is this not printing right, having one less thing to have to consider is a huge deal, because time is money, and you know, the more time you spend trying to diagnose a problem, that's less time you're printing, and less time you're printing means less things you are making money off of, right? So that's the reason you would invest in this system. If you are just doing some general printing at home, this is really not necessary. This is the kind of setup for the person that's printing 18, 19, 20 hours a day every single day like I am. So that's the whole thing. That's why you would do this. Linear rails, are they necessary? Absolutely not. Are they a genuine improvement to the overall experience of printing in the long term? Absolutely. But you have to make that decision yourself or if it's worth it. It's also very expensive if you go with genuine Highwind rails. Again, I don't think that's even necessary. The Chi-Wind stuff works perfectly fine. So save yourself a buck or two if you're going to do this whole system. I'll put a link in the description to where I got everything, and if you want to take it on, more power to you. But I think this whole setup is perfect because it utilizes the stock frames. So the 4040, the 2020, the 2040, they all work with stock frame components, which means modification is very easy. Things like my belt tensioner works. This is a nice metal belt tensioner. This is another metal belt tensioner. My light up here attaches properly. Once you go with something like Fuse 3D and their proprietary systems, you lose the ability to start using things that are already available on the market for your system. So that's why I chose this. That's why I did it. I hope that helps, guys. And yeah, if you want to see more content like this, just subscribe and check out my videos once in a while. And yeah, thanks for watching.